Welcome to the Winning University. We are in section 1 and session 7. We are talking about building consistency. So this whole journey that we're on is a journey of transformation. Ultimately, it's about a change that is happening in you in order for change to come through you. Now, by the very nature that the change is first happening in you, reminds us that the change is first of all unseen. And so the change, when it starts to take place, just like when a child is conceived, at the very early stages, the weeks, if not the first couple of months, very little is seen. It is felt. There are changes in the mother that are experienced, but it's only in the later stages where there's evidence of something taking place. And so one of the reasons why in the last few sessions we've been looking at negative feelings is because before a change is seen outside of us, externally, there are going to be prompts and signals that are going to indicate that something is taking place. Now, go with me on the analogy of the child being created and eventually being brought into the world. I won't go into too much detail. You can ask my wife about that. She loves baby programs, just like anything that is a baby program showing the whole process and babies being born. I mean, I've sat down and watched hundreds of babies being born while eating my tea. I mean, it's not a great combination. My wife absolutely loves it. But I know from our own experience that there are shifts and movements in the mother and little feelings where she'll stop and she'll say, hang on a minute, something just moved, something just shifted. And it's the same when there is a vision that we're carrying. It's like a baby. It's like a future, quite literally a future that is going on a process of being created, and there are prompts and signals. Now, of course, with a baby, there's experience of either, if you've had a child before, you've got experience and you kind of think, oh, well, that's what that is, that feeling, that movement. I remember that with child number 1, 2 or 3 or however many you've had. Or other people will say to you, hey, do you know what? Yeah, I felt that as well at that point. But the difference here is that when it's a future that is unique to you, sometimes we haven't got somebody else's experience to measure it against. And so it can be difficult to interpret some of those feelings, especially negative feelings and negative emotions. But I actually think that the process that we're going through is actually going to help you begin to discern what those feelings, those signals are actually pointing to. That they may feel negative, but actually they are positive prompts. And so the feeling that we're dealing with in this session is the feeling of confusion. That feeling of confusion, I guess another word you could use is contradiction. In other words, where if you ever said to somebody when they've asked, how do you feel about that? And you've said, I'm not sure quite how I feel. And you say that because I guess it's like two sides of the coin. There's an upside, there's a downside, there's a side which kind of, hey, this is really positive and joyful, but on the other hand, actually this can be really challenging and actually feels quite scary. And so there's a contradiction, there's a confusion. Now, this is absolutely normal for the process of the transformation that you're going through. Because at this point of where we're journeying, we've talked about identity and vision, and we've talked about the motivation and that whole thing of surrender, how actually this whole process is you saying goodbye to the old you and embracing the new you that is compatible with the future that you are creating or that God is creating through you. This, of course, is the bigger picture of discipleship. We are being formed in the likeness of Christ Jesus. We are going through character transformation. It's another word for sanctification. We have been saved, we are being saved, we shall be saved. So we're going through this iterative, changing process one degree of glory to another. It's the metamorphosis between the caterpillar and the butterfly. We see it in creation. And so there is this point that we reach where it becomes confusing because we've surrendered the old, but as we start to step into the new, it's like we can be caught between the old phase and the new phase. And this is the part that I want to look at, because when we look at this transformation and this journey, we suddenly realize that there are new challenges that we have to embrace. And there are new things that maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, however many months ago, that maybe we were quite happy at being inconsistent in certain areas of our lives. But the vision demands now that there is consistency. And so building consistency and dealing with the emotion of confusion is absolutely linked. And I'm going to show you how. So before I jump into the 10 points, again, let me just use a personal analogy to maybe explain this shift that's taking place. So when I got married, on the day I got married, I made a decision that was a legal decision in the eyes of the law. And of course, as a person of faith, somebody who follows Christ, and Leanne as well, it was in the sight of God. So we made a decision. It was an event. Okay, it was on the 8th of July 2000. It's in history. It's there. We have a certificate. We've got videos and all kinds of embarrassing things as well to look at, remembering how young we looked and fragile that we looked. And so it was an event. But what I realized is, whilst getting married was an event, the process that I was in was something I was still catching up with. So let me give you an illustration. So some of the early challenges in marriage is that you've got two people who are used to living single lives that decided on a day to make a decision to come together, but now have to learn what it actually means to live in community. There's a surrendering of rights that used to belong to being single, that now it's different when you're married. But on that day when we made the decision, it was an event, but we're experiencing the implications catching up with us. And so it's the same when we had our firstborn child, Erin. And so Erin came to us on the 6th of June, 2002. It was an event. It was a point in history. We have a certificate. We don't have a certificate for everything that happened in our lives. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? We have a whole wodge of certificates. But these things we did have certificates with. And so it was an event. But do you know what? For days, weeks, even months, even years later, it's like the outworking of that event is still catching up with you. There were times when me and Leanne would turn to each other and say, we've got another human being in the house. Like, we're responsible for another human life. I mean, even like this year when she turned 18, it's like we have another adult in the house. That is our child. And so it's like there's this events that take place in like shifts that happen in our lives. Shifts and seasons. And they happen, but we're always catching up with them. Okay? We're always playing catch up with a shift that has already taken place. When I received Christ Jesus as Lord, at 7 years of age, I made the decision. I'd say at age 13, when I was baptized in the Holy Spirit, that was, I guess, a great awareness of the implications of that decision. But even then, you're still catching up with the outworking of the decision that you've made. And so that's why at times it can bring confusion. When a shift happens, you're constantly playing catch up with the shift that's already taken place. I hope this is making sense. So number one, and we're going to go to a particular point in history in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that's going to help give us some principles for how we manage the confusion that can come with the shift and how we can build consistency from the confusion. So number one, it's this. You think in your heart before your head. As a man thinks in his heart, the proverb says, he is. As a man thinks in his heart, so he is. So we don't think in our heads as most people think. We actually think in our hearts. In other words, the decision of our hearts is something that happens before we can fully rationalize it and understand it. What God does, he always starts in the spirit. Now the spirit, you know the four circles: spirit, soul, mind, and body. Okay? So everything starts in the spirit. Any shift that takes place in your life and in my life starts at a belief level. But it's going to start before it reaches our minds. In other words, our capacity and ability to understand. So the distance between our spirit and our mind, however long that takes, the shift happens at the spirit. Okay, I made a decision to follow Christ. In that moment, the Holy Spirit came to dwell in me. But the full implications of me understanding that there's a distance, and that's where confusion happens. That's where contradiction happens. That's where it can be really challenging to understand. How do I navigate this now? Okay, and I want to go to Joshua 24. This is a point in history when Joshua, as the leader of the nation of Israel, of course, he transitioned from Moses, and the nation was about to go into a new era as they had possessed the promised land. They'd fought the battles, and Joshua is taking them through what we know as the covenant renewal at Shechem. Okay, and I'm going to pick up on some passages from this moment. Okay, and I want us to understand the shifts that happen, and therefore what you and I need to do in order to build consistency and therefore strength, rather than being weakened by confusion. So Joshua 24 from verse 11, it says this: "Then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites, but I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you. Also the 2 Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow, so I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build. And you live in them and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant." You see, at this moment, what we're being reminded of is that God takes his people on a journey into a promise. For them, it was a promised land. It was a physical space that he was taking them into. But notice, he says, you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho, and there were multiple fights. Whenever there's a fight, fights can be disorientating. If you've ever seen boxers box away, you know, there are moments, even for both competitors, when punches are thrown and they're caught by a punch. And in that moment, there's a disorientation. Fights happen on this journey of possessing the promise. The vision that you've got, the change that you're alive to see created. It's a promise that you carry, a promise of a greater future, a promise of what God wants to do in terms of bringing heaven to earth. But there are battles along the way. And the battles are shifts. They are disorientating. And it's important to know that through every battle that we have to navigate in the pursuit of the promise, there are always going to be these shifts that are going to take place. There are always going to be these moments where we make a decision, but then we have to play catch up with the implications of the decision. Again, I'm just going to give kind of multiple examples, I guess, just to make sure that we really land this in a way we can understand it. Again, I love building programs. Grand Designs, one of my favorite programs. For those who don't know what Grand Designs is, they follow the journey of people who set about building their dream home. homes that are just usually pushing the envelope, pushing the boundaries of engineering. And what's amazing about this process is it tests the people. They set out with like joy, like, yeah, we're going to build this most amazing dream house. But then you see the battles that they go through. And multiple times throughout the battles, they are questioning, if we'd have known what we were going through right now, I'm not sure we'd have made the decision. They will say things like, right now, this is not feeling like a dream, or words to that effect. In other words, there are battles that create confusion. It's like, hang on a minute, I'm building my dream house, but this is feeling like a nightmare. Can you see? Contradiction, confusion. It's the same, and that's in marriage. It's like, it's all this romantic picture of, it's just going to be like dancing through fields of blossom and birds, I don't know, landing on us and tweeting and singing along to a lovely song. I'm not sure where that's come from. It sounds more like I'm on drugs. But, it's just like we have this image of like, surely it's going to be amazing. And you know what? It is amazing, but there are battles. And it's the confusion that comes from battles. And do you know what? Ultimately, the battle starts really in us. We think the battle might be with the other person, or in a business that we're running, we think the battle is with other people. But actually, the battles are in who you're becoming. And God is here reminding them through Joshua that there have been battles, but God does deliver us through the battles. And you know what? He's reminding them of this because the battles weren't going to stop now they'd entered into the promised land. In fact, there's a new season with new battles. And the key is knowing what to do. And so let's move on to the next point. It's this: access requires abandonment. One of the key things to remember is this, is that in order to go into the promise that God has got for you, you've got to give up in order to go in. In other words, there are things that we need to sift through. One of the points from the previous session was you can't access a new season in an old identity. And that's not just a principle, there's a practical outworking to that. There are beliefs, there are habits, there are choices that we used to make that we need to stop making because they're no longer compatible with who we now are, because we've been through we're going through this shift and transition. And so there's an abandonment. The question we need to ask ourselves is, the confusion that I'm feeling, maybe it's because I have yet to abandon what is needed in order to fully access the new season. Let me give you an analogy. At the airport where you're checking your luggage and your hand luggage particularly, and they've got a picture, haven't they, of all the items that you can't take past this point. It's one of the points that very often, if I've forgotten to put some of the larger toiletry items in the case that's already gone through, I end up having to throw away because they say you can't take this size canister or tube of cream or whatever it is, and you have to start throwing stuff away because to access going through, you have to abandon. There's a scan and a check. And when we're in transition, we need to realize that we are entering into what has already taken place in terms of the decision. I've got my ticket to go on that plane. I made a decision. I'm flying to another country. But now I'm going through the process that is catching up with that decision. And there's sometimes confusion when we don't realize, at the airport, we know if we've done it multiple times, oh yeah, that's what I've got to do. But if we don't know and we've never been this way before, there can be confusion. There are sometimes distressful moments because there's certain things that we don't want to let go of. Whether that's responsibilities, or whether they are habits, even sometimes when there's pain that we've been carrying. But in order to go into, we've got to give up. What right now are we not putting off? Hebrews 12, 1-2. We're reminded, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. We've got to throw off in order to go in. Point number 3, we've got to break with tradition, but not with laws. We've got to break with tradition, but not with laws. Verse 14 of Joshua 24, in this great renewal of the covenant, a covenant being an agreement between 2 or more parties, where there are responsibilities on both sides to fulfill their commitment to one another, to bring about the agreed vision and outcome. And God is reminding the people through Joshua of what he's done. And now the people are making their commitment to their side of the covenant going into this new season. And this is what it says. Now fear the Lord, verse 14, and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. In other words, there are traditions, things that you've picked up along the way. Traditions are not laws. And it's really important that we understand this, because even within church life, we can pick up traditions and think they're laws. In other words, you have to do it that way. No, laws are unchangeable. You know, even Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, when he talked about him coming as the Messiah and bringing the kingdom, he said in Matthew chapter 5 that I've not come to abolish the law, because you can't abolish what is fundamentally in place and will remain regardless of time or era. But I've come to fulfill the law. Traditions, however, were Jesus' main fight with the religious. The religious used traditions to control and manipulate. And you know what? Traditions control you and I. Maybe there are some traditions right now you've got to give up, because they are controlling you and preventing you moving into what God has got for you. We've got to detach from the old you, and we've got to strengthen what has to remain. And what has to remain are the laws, the principles. We've got to be faithful to laws, and we've got to divorce ourselves away from traditions that no longer belong in this season. Okay? So what right now do you need to break with? What is a tradition? What is a law? It's important to ask that question. Number 4, confusion is unrefined clarity. So that's, again, an encouragement that when we experience that confusion or that contradiction, it's unrefined clarity. It's clarity that we crave for in those moments. But this is an encouragement that actually the confusion is going to create the perfect environment for clarity to come. Deuteronomy 32, 10 to 12, we have this picture, again, of God and the nation of Israel. In a desert land, it says, he found him. In a barren and howling waste, he shielded him and cared for him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest and hovers over its young, that spreads its wings to catch them and carries them aloft. Now, why am I sharing this? Because sometimes the confusion is interpreted as absence. So we can often call out, and this is human nature, God, where are you right now? I can't see clearly. I'm confused. And we think confusion therefore means absence. But in the picture that we're getting here from Scripture is just like the eagle that stirs up the nest. In other words, when the eaglets, if that's the right word, I'm sure that's probably not the right word, but you know what I mean, little eagles. When it's time for them to get out of the nest, the parent eagle will stir up the nest, in other words, create discomfort and actually cause them to be thrown out of the nest. So in that moment, there's confusion because, hang on a minute, my protector has just thrown me out the nest. What? Has my protector now become my destroyer? Can you see all of a sudden, the head hasn't caught up with the reality of the process that they're in. They have to be kicked out of the nest in order for them to fly. They're not going to discover their wings until they're falling. Can you see, again, the contradiction? We've got to be ready for the contradictions, and confusion is going to bring about the clarity if we ask questions rather than just simply make statements and conclusions such as, well, God has given up on me, or where is God in all of this? God is there. God is there. He is the eagle stirring things up, not to destroy you, but actually to protect you and to get you ready for the coming season. Number 5, confusion comes from the contradiction. Confusion comes from the contradiction. I'm kind of following the same picture here of the mother eagle who pushes the eaglet out of the nest. And I want to link this to Psalm 23, because I think for me, the moments in my journey so far that have been most confusing have come through relationships that didn't go the way I thought they would go. I was having this conversation the other day with somebody, and they were saying, do you know what? It's strange because there are bigger problems that I've had to deal with. But dealing problems with relationships that kind of on paper aren't as big as the issues I've had to deal with are affecting me more. And it's interesting with relationships because relationships are emotional and relationships are spiritual. And so when relationships have conflict, relationships start to shift and change, because the shift that happens in you will create shift in your relationships. And that can be hugely confusing and create all kinds of contradictions, such as there'll be people who will say, we'll always be with you. And you know what? In that moment, it's not that they were lying, but they didn't realize that actually what they were saying, there was going to be a process. And that statement may not have been fully aware of the process that they would have to embrace in order for them to stay with you. And again, it doesn't mean they're bad or that you're the good one, but it's just the shifts that are taking place. And in that confusion that comes from contradiction, again, we can sometimes think that God isn't present, that God isn't at work, that actually we're going backwards rather than forwards. But let me remind you of, again, carrying on from the eagle analogy and using the shepherd analogy from Psalm 23. Psalm 23 says this, a well-known psalm. I'm just read a couple of verses. He guides me, it says in verse 3 of Psalm 23. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now let me just remind you, the rod and the staff of the shepherd, if you've ever seen a shepherd use a rod and a staff, it's not got a nice fluffy pillow on the end of it that kind of just rubs up and down your face like, oh, lovely rod, lovely staff. You know, I'm not sure why I've kind of put on an Irish accent while doing that, but you know, you kind of like, you've got this image that they are from Psalm 23, because we have these pictures, it's all lovely walking through, you know, by the pastures and the still waters, and then, yes, there's a valley of darkness and evil and death, but we kind of somehow don't even imagine that to be a horrible place, because it's just a lovely, woolly, fluffy psalm. But no, the actual rod used with the sheep, sometimes it's to guide, in other words, just a gentle pressing against the neck. Sometimes there's a bit of a clobber in order to make the sheep, which largely is a bit clueless, go in the right direction. And you know what? There are moments, I'm sure, for the sheep where the staff and the rod is an instrument that creates confusion because it feels like I've just been walloped around the head. And then I interpret that as, that shepherd doesn't like me. But no, the shepherd actually is for me. A shepherd that doesn't like me will actually just let me go anywhere and wander off the edge of a cliff. You see, this is the process that you're in. And so, number 6, and I'm moving on quickly here, be led by the person you are becoming. Be led by the person you are becoming. You see, the moment we start to get clarity and articulate, this is the person I'm becoming, and we make a statement, and this is where our I am values come in. This is where our values become key foundational blocks, because the moment I realize I've got my values in place, then when I get clobbered and I get challenged, they become the fixed points which says, you know what, even though I feel rubbish right now, even though I feel disorientated, I am identity, I am impact, whatever your values are. And of course, they're based upon principles of who Christ is. In that moment, I've got to be led by the person that I'm becoming. You see, if not, then what happens is we'll make emotional decisions. I've had conversations even recently with leaders who are like, I don't want to correct the people I'm leading because I may make them feel bad, or you know, I don't want to challenge them because I feel like I want it for them more than they want it, and eventually they'll catch on. And I'm like, do you know what? To love them is not to pander to them. To love them is to be really clear of the standards that are required for their potential to come out. And in that moment, you've got to realize there are going to be relational alignments that are going to take place. And so you've got to know, this is the person that I'm becoming. And I cannot compromise on being that person in order to accommodate somebody else. Okay? And so 4 very quick questions that you can ask yourself. Number 1, what do I have to leave behind? Number 2, what do I take forward as it is? These are practical questions. Number 3, what do I take forward but in a different form? Or number 4, what lies ahead that I need to make room for? Now, those are 4 questions that you can create in self-reflection and start to answer, and they relate in the areas of your wheel of relationships, learning, money, health. Look at your professional wheel as well and start to evaluate, because you've got to catch up with the shift that has already taken place. Verse 14, let me go back to it. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. The inconsistencies of the nation of Israel were linked to the fact that they prioritized idols over God. Now, you and I immediately think of idols as in like little gold figures that sit on a mantelpiece. But idols are what we get intimate with that actually starts to distort our identity. An idol could be a career. I get so intimate with the idea that I must become this person. It could even be, I must have this role in church. That can be an idol. And I get so intimate with that idea, and I form the image of who I am around that, and then actually God has got more in store for me, but God is going to have to break me in order for me to wake up to the fact that actually I've made an idol out of this role. I made an idol out of money. I've made an idol out of a car or whatever it may be. And God is reminding them, you've got to keep throwing away the idols and the gods. Because your forefathers, your ancestors, they got caught up in it. And that's why they took 40 years to enter into the promise. Because the longer you get intimate with an idol, you delay entering into the promise. That's why in coaching is the quickest way of entering into the promises that God's got for you. That's why discipleship is so key, because it's the consistent asking the questions. There is a God that I am potentially worshiping that I need to throw away. So let's move on to the next point. Number 7, new seasons require new boundaries. New seasons require new boundaries. We become inconsistent in areas where we have no boundaries. And again, this is why we use the evaluation wheel. This is why we look at the key areas of our lives and ask, what are the boundaries that are in place? What are the laws, principles that are governing those areas of our lives? Laws and principles are boundaries. Laws and principles are boundaries, and boundaries help to define what needs to be protected, what needs to be looked after. And when we have no boundaries, that's when we become lazy, and that's when we become inconsistent. And the result is we're not able to enter into the fullness of what God has for us. Now, sometimes, and I'm kind of looking at this through the lens of, yes, leading yourself, but also leading others. Sometimes it can be really challenging as a leader because you are aware of the inconsistencies of those that you're leading. And it can be challenging because on one hand, you kind of want to challenge people with it, and you have to. But at the same time, you also need them to get it themselves. Now, of course, this is the same in a family. One of the things that I've been looking at for a while and concerned about was my son Ruben. Like, he loves playing on his Xbox. And so I said to Ruben, I said, just watch how much you play on your Xbox, because ultimately, like, there's nothing wrong with playing on it, and it's great to have fun with it. But actually, you need to put a boundary in place and only playing it so much so that you can do the other things that you need to do to follow the vision of what you want to do with your life. And but I didn't want to kind of like say, right, I'm going to tell you now what is what. I wanted him to some degree to discover it himself, while at the same time me challenging him. And it's interesting because literally like a couple of days before we recorded this, I got this text just out of the blue. Daddy, that's me, put a 3-hour time limit on my Xbox. I said to him, okay, my boy. And then I put, I am focused as a text as well, like reminding him of his I ams. He said, I know at one time it will be annoying, but I know it's for my own good. I thought, that's amazing. It's almost like the realization that I've got to put a boundary in place, which I'm not going to like. It's going to be confusing, but it's for my own good. And I thought, you know what? If he can get that now at 12, then and keep that going throughout his life, then it will serve him well. And this is when Joshua and the people are coming into this new season. The people have relied upon Joshua, they've relied upon Moses, and now they're being released to go and to set up and settle in their new promised land. It's a different dynamic that they're entering into. And this is what Joshua states in verse 15. If serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He's making a confession. I'll talk about that in one moment. But really, he's saying, me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He's telling his house and everything that's in that, all the decisions and choices that he has to make within his household. He's saying, all you choices, we are going this way. We are setting new boundaries for a new season. And he's doing this in front of the people because he realizes he's not going to be around to kind of say, hey guys, you need to sort this out. Oh, no, over here. Because he's saying, guys, you're now going to have to lead yourselves. And so when you look at the evaluation wheel, when you look at the different segments, ask yourself the question, what does it mean for this area of my life to serve the Lord? What boundaries need to be in place for the new season? Number 8, buy-in follows being sold out. Getting buy-in follows being sold out. This follows the line and challenge when, how do I take as many people with me as I go on this journey? Because there are going to be shifts in relationships. But the best chance that you have of taking people with you is not waiting for people to almost give you the permission to move into the new season, but to say, I am convinced of who I am. I'm convinced of what I'm called to do, and I'm going to push ahead. And that conviction, that leadership will cause others, the right people anyway, to follow. Now be aware, conviction, which is at the heart of setting culture, will determine who you attract and who you repel. In one sense, if nothing happens, there's probably not a deep enough conviction. So there's good news and bad news. Okay, there's going to be some confusion because there's going to be some clear out. Okay, but there's going to be new people coming in as well. So again, just reminding that if you want to get buy-in from people, if you want people to get what's happening in you, you've got to be sold out. You can't be like, oh, stop. Oh, I'm getting a bit of reaction. Pull back now. You've got to be sold out. Make a decision with your finances. Stick to it. Don't pull back if it's the right decision. Keep on being consistent. Declare with your confession that this is absolutely right for me and my household. Number 9, impose personal standards for the sake of a higher goal. Impose personal standards for the sake of a higher goal. The athlete that is working towards the Olympics every 4 years pictures in their minds that race of 10 seconds, 30 seconds, however long the race is or the event is. And that picture of the future imposes a standard on the present. Get up, eat right, do right, be amongst the right people. And Joshua is reminding the people in verse 19, he said, in fact, this is interesting. Watch Joshua. He says to them, you're not able to serve the Lord. He's a holy God. He's a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. And verse 21, it's like the people are like, no, we will serve the Lord. It's almost like Joshua was playing hard to get, oh, you guys aren't going to want this. It's going to be too difficult for you. You know, it's like good psychology by Joshua here. But the people are like, no, we will serve the Lord. Do you know what? Imposing higher personal standards on you, we sometimes think, oh, it's going to push people away. It will pull the right people to you and it will pull them through the challenges that they need to make. There are people lining up behind the decisions that you are not yet making. And don't just do it for your sake, do it for their sake as well. And then the final point is this: establish consistency through confession and accountability. Establish consistency through confession and accountability. Verse 22, Joshua said, well, right then, you are witnesses. Now you've said, we're going to serve the Lord against yourselves, that you have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, we are witnesses, the people replied. Now then, said Joshua, throw away those gods. And of course, he went on to set up a pillar. He recorded down that day the covenant that they made. What does that tell us? It says, you know what? We have to publicly declare, these are my convictions. These are the decisions that I'm making. This is where accountability is key. This is where coaching is key, where I'm actually giving other people permission to hold me to my own standards. Without it, that's where the inconsistency comes. But when I confess my commitment, when I hold myself accountable, and there's some creative suggestions here. I'm not suggesting get a big, huge pillar, an altar, and put it in your garden, but have visual reminders of the commitment that you've made to yourself and to others along the journey. This is how, in the confusion, we remind ourselves when we're disorientated because of the battle. No, I have chosen to serve the Lord. No, I've chosen to give the first of my finances to God and His house. No, I've chosen to make sure I look after my health so I can live as long as possible to serve the people that I love. No, I am going to read and not just devour Netflix because I've got to keep growing for the sake of people that I'm leading. I could go on, but I hope you've caught the heart of what I've tried to communicate. There is going to be confusion because there's going to be battles. There are going to be contradictions because you're constantly playing catch up with the aftermath of the shift that's already taken place because of decisions that you've made. But conviction, confession, and making a covenant with God and with other people is the key to keep on progressing through to the promises and the outworkings of what God has got planned for you. Keep on going, keep on confessing and declaring, and I'm here to cheer you along the way.